Hey and welcome back to Fanfic Reading. Today we are reading The Warmth That Changed It All by Raalm and ToxicExotic. I hope you enjoy.
Chapter 75. A Moment to Celebrate. The last few days had been chaotic to say the least, though Weiss had hardly expected them to be anything but. Though Jacques had yet to reveal his plan, or even discuss what had happened, the 2 days since they had finally shown the truth to the world had been pretty chaotic. In fact, there had not been a single moment away from the house where she had not been swarmed by the press. Every corner she took, every time she stepped out of her car, every time she exited the office, they were there waiting for her with blinding flashes and incessant questions. And she knew Yang was receiving the same treatment. Just as she had predicted, it had taken the press almost no time whatsoever to uncover Yang's identity. That very night, Weiss had received a message from her girlfriend with a picture of 4 vans parked outside her house. By morning, the front page of every paparazzi magazine, and even a few legitimate ones, were emblazoned with a picture of them kissing next to the infernal hell machine that was Yang's bike, lovingly named Bumblebee, as well as a few shots of them relaxing at Blake's coffee shop. Pages 2 and 3 though had been talking about what little they had dug up about her, such as Ruby, Summer, and Tai, though thankfully the white fang detail had not yet been discovered. Weiss also knew that Yang had been followed for the last few days, but the woman didn't seem to care. And, as callous as it would probably sound to many, neither did Weiss. Even as the press continued to take pictures through the coffee shop window, causing pretty much every eye of every patron to throw them interested looks, Weiss was struggling to care. She was too busy being publicly happily cuddled up against her girlfriend for the 3rd day in a row, while reading a book and contributing to the small conversation that was happening between Yang, Ren, and Juan. There really wasn't much time. Yang grimaced to the other blonde. We were only there for like 3 days. Right, Weiss? MHM. Weiss hummed, giving the boy a nod. Our first days there really wasn't the best, and the other 2 were actually rather busy. I get that. John groaned and took a bite of his muffin. But you guys aren't the ones who have to listen to her on the phone. His voice turned high-pitched. Why didn't you tell me she was in Argus? Or that she was dating someone? We could have had dinner. You never tell me things anymore. He isn't lying, Ren said dully and sipped his tea. She was on loudspeaker. It really was quite annoying. Sorry, Yang frowned. Promise her I'll stop by next time we're in town. Thank you. The boy groaned in relief, slumping back in his chair. So what are you 2 doing later? I don't actually think we have a lot planned for today, Weiss replied. Realizing she wasn't really paying much attention to it, she put it aside and slipped the previously occupied hand into Yang's with a smile. Maybe just relaxing at home. Home? Yang asked questioningly, a grin on her face. Well, you've been living there for a month, and you are moving back in tonight until you and Tai see Dr. Dark. That is true, Yang hummed. A night in with you sounds good. But I bought us spots at this restaurant that's opening in about an hour. What? Weiss asked in surprise. Well, technically you bought them, but I figured it would be a great first date. It's out by Viridian Court. I love that place. I know. The blonde grinned. Weiss reached up and pressed a kiss against her lips, and Yang happily responded. Though it had been something they were doing at every available moment, the feeling was not lessening for Weiss. The fact that she could now kiss her girlfriend whenever she wanted without having to check they were alone was exhilarating. Every time they did it, it sent waves of happiness rushing through her, and she couldn't help but extend it for just a few moments longer. All right. John coughed. We get it, you're in love. Aw. Yang cooed as they broke apart. Someone's jealous. Jealous? Me? John scoffed. Have you seen my girlfriend? I have. Yang grinned, picking up her hot chocolate. She's too good for you. I know. The boy deflated as Weiss lightly tapped her girlfriend on the arm. I still have no idea why she chose me. Because you're a great guy, Ren assured him. Yeah. Yang smiled and took a sip from her drink. I'm just busting your balls. You 2 are great together. I guess so. John sighed. Stop being mean to him. Weiss scolded her girlfriend, knowing John was definitely someone with a lot of confidence issues. So what are you 2 doing today? Boys' night with Nep and Sunday. Book club with Blake. Their replies came at the same time, and Weiss saw them exchange a surprised look with each other. I guess I will be late to boys' night then, Rin said quickly. That's cool, John said awkwardly. We'll save you some pizza then. While John being awkward was nothing new, the fact that Rin actually looked frazzled made Weiss raise her eyebrow. In all the time she had met the boy, he was rather stoic and very difficult to get to emote. In fact, unless it was aimed at Nora, the boy approached everything with an almost impervious, stonewall expression. We should go actually, Rin said, standing up and finishing his tea. We still need to pick a movie. Right, John? Oh, yeah. The blonde coughed. Later, guys. Later, weirdos. Yang chuckled at the pair as they walked off with a wave, having been watching them with amusement. Were they acting odd to you too? She asked. They're always odd. The woman shrugged, twisting around on the couch and pulling Weiss into a cuddle. Speaking of odd though, has he still not talked to you? Nope. Weiss replied and sunk into the cuddle while resting a leg over Yang's knee as the woman's hand began to soothingly stroke her shin. Not that I expected him to. Probably still thinking about the best way to destroy your life so that his talk can include a threat. Well, he can't buy my dad's house. Yang shrugged. Everything is paid off. We both know that isn't what he will use, she said with a sad sigh. Yeah, well, except for a few friends that are still in it. I've had nothing to do with a white fan in years. There's nothing he can stick on me. I doubt he cares about that, Yang. You're not having second thoughts about this, are you? Of course not, Weiss replied immediately, catching her girlfriend's eyes and reaching out to touch her cheek. Only a fool would regret being with you. I just don't want you to get overconfident. I'm not overconfident, Yang said, her tone turning slightly more serious. I'm just being optimistic. I know he's going to try something bad, but we'll be ready for him when he does. Gazing into her girlfriend's eyes for a second, Weiss leaned in and pressed their lips together again. While she loved the blonde's optimism, she really did hope that it was not overconfidence because even though Weiss knew most of Jacques' tricks, that didn't mean she could predict his every move. The man was more of a snake than the marble statue he had procured for their garden. I hope we are. Weiss smiled as she pulled away. But I'm not letting him take you away from me and Dash. You two done with those? Looking up at the new arrival, she saw Ilya standing next to the chair and motioning towards the empty plates. The two of them hadn't talked since the day she had revealed what had happened to the girl's parents, but Weiss certainly understood why. After all, she had made it so that one of the girl's most painful moments was constantly in her face everywhere she went. And the reason for doing it had not even worked as she intended. Her father had slithered his way out of it once again, and all the news had done was sent Atlas into chaos. But it was a situation she was determined to fix. The girl was an important part of Yang's life, and she didn't want to cause friction between Yang and her friends. Yup. Yang beamed up at her friend. Thanks, Rainbow. It's my job. Sucks for you. The woman grinned and stuck out her tongue. Well, at least I still have a job, Ilya replied smugly, wiping the smile from Yang's face. Yeah, well, just fetch me another hot chocolate, will ya? Actually, Yang. Weiss cut in as the fauness rolled her eyes and turned to walk away with the plates. Would you mind taking that back and getting the drinks? Moving her legs from Yang's knee, she watched as Ilya stopped and the blonde gazed between them. She seemed a little confused for a second, but after giving her a silently pleading look, the brawler nodded and gave a groan as she stood up. Sure, she agreed, plucking the tray from Ilya's hand. I can check on rooms as well. Make sure there's been no inappropriate behavior in the workplace. Ilya's freckles turned a bright pink as Yang winked and walked away. However, the moment the girl was gone, the freckles returned back to normal, and her brow furrowed slightly. Almost immediately, Weiss recognized that there was hesitation in the girl from the way she was standing with her arms folded, and tried to ease it with a small smile. Can we talk? She asked carefully, ready to accept it if Ilya said no. Did she put you up to this? The fauness questioned skeptically. No. Weiss shook her head. I just have something I'd like to say. The hesitation continued for a second and Ilya's freckles tinted blue, but she finally sat down in the seat John had previously occupied. Fine. But I'm working, so make it quick. Of course. Weiss nodded. Thankfully, having seen the girl repeatedly over the past few days during her visits to the coffee shop, she had been working on what she would say when she finally had the chance. I just wanted to say that I am really sorry for what I did to you. In my attempt to ruin my father's reputation and get him out of the company, I callously disregarded how you and others would feel about that information in favor of myself. And in doing so, I caused you to relive a moment from your life that is more painful than I could even comprehend. I should have been more considerate to your feelings, and I really hope that I can make up for what I've done eventually. Though Ilya's freckles remained blue as she listened, Weiss did notice that her eyes slowly turned back to their original gray. The girl shifted in her seat a little, her gray orbs moving a little as she remained silent and thought through her answer. Weiss knew there was a chance that the girl might not forgive her, and would accept it if that was her choice, but she really did hope that wasn't the case. Eventually, though, after almost a minute, the fawness eye cleared and she gave her a pointed look. There's an officer upstairs right now giving Blake her registration interview, the girl said firmly. Would you support me if I talked to him afterwards and tried to file charges against your dad for what he did? Weiss paused. She had meant what she said. She really wanted to make things right with Ilya, but if she stood by the girl in such an action, then she would absolutely be kissing her position at the STC goodbye for charges that in all likelihood would not stick. And even though she was still unsure whether that was even what she wanted for her future anymore, it was still something important to her. But had that not been what had caused the predicament in the first place? Had her inability to put what was right above what she wanted not been the very thing that had caused Ilya so much pain? That had ignited everything in Atlas? Winter was right. That was selfish. A selfish desire that was ingrained in her from her father's influence over her upbringing. But she was no longer a child. She didn't have to adhere to his lessons, and most importantly, she didn't want to. She wanted to help the world. She wanted the Shni name to be respectable and just, and that couldn't happen if she herself wasn't acting in such a selfish way. So, taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes and gave the girl a small nod. If that is what you want to do, Weiss said slowly and opened her eyes, locking onto Ilya's so that she knew she was serious. Then I shall support you in any way that I can. You'd testify and say you found the evidence? I would, Weiss said firmly. Again Ilya fell silent as she thought, but it didn't last as long as last time. After only a few seconds, the girl gave a small nod and stood up. While her freckles were still blue, she let out a low sigh. Okay then, she said quietly. Apology accepted. Thank you. Weiss smiled gratefully. And if you ever need anything, then please just tell me. My family owes you a lot for everything we have done to you. The only thing you owed me was an apology, Ilya countered, causing Weiss' eyebrow to raise a little. It's your dad who ruined my childhood. I suppose so, Weiss hummed, seeing Yang making her way back over out the corner of her eye. But I should let you get back to work. Right, the girl agreed. Well, I'll see you around, I guess. Trading an insult with Yang as she walked away, Weiss watched the girl go with a smile. Though she was certain there would still be a little discomfort between them, she hoped it would naturally dissipate after a while. Everything all good over here? The blonde asked curiously, and picked up her jacket. MHM, she replied, standing up and accepting the fresh coffee. Just making up for a mistake I made. You did what you thought was right. It was still a mistake. Weiss shook her head and slung her bag over her shoulder. One that I will learn from. Fair enough. Yang shrugged, clearly disagreeing but choosing not to press the point. So you ready to go? Ribbon cutting is in 40 minutes. I'm ready. Weiss grinned and took the blonde's hand as she saw the reporters outside the store begin to rush to the door. Just cover any exposed flesh. The vultures are getting hungry. Weiss was a little sad as the car turned a corner and Founders Towers came into sight. The afternoon that Yang had prepared for them had been a pretty amazing one, and the fact that it was coming to an end was quite disappointing. It all started at Viridian Court, a group of buildings in the east side of Vale that overlooked the vast untouched area beyond the kingdom's walls. Trees stretched out for miles and miles, the vibrant green leaves of the emerald forest eventually giving way to the crimson-red leaves of Forever Fall. Past the forest were the mountains, great peaks that reached into the sky and blocked off the ocean that laid on the other side. The buildings themselves were amazing too, mainly consisting of offices for the council and its workers. The topmost floors were all connected by walkways and filled with various restaurants and stores. Due to its location, however, only the wealthy were really able to afford anything from those places, but a portion of every lien spent at the establishments there went directly into the council's funds to help preserve the city's infrastructure. And while it was not a huge amount, there had been a few improvements done since its development. The opening ceremony they had attended though had been for an Atlesian sushi place that had turned out to be incredible. All the fish had been freshly brought in from Atlas waters, and every chef had practiced at a world-renowned Atlesian Culinary Institute. Having not been to her home city in some time and Vale having rather different ways to prepare their fish, it was good to finally have some food that reminded her of the restaurants her grandmother had taken her to as a child. After the meal though, the two had gone to a small piano contest that was being held nearby. And even though Yang had practically fallen asleep, it had been fun to relax with her girlfriend, and what new promising talent gave it their all in the hope of winning a chance to play alongside an orchestra that was performing next month. Once it had ended, however, and the winner had been decided, it had finally been time for the date to end. It was bittersweet. As much as she had enjoyed the afternoon, she really wished it had lasted longer. The feeling of being out, of walking around the city hand in hand with Yang, sitting across from a table, cuddled up on a chair, every moment of it was intoxication, and it was very hard to ever want it to end. But it had. And they had finally made their way back to the car and began the journey home. Thankfully though, while she was sad that the date was over, she was still more than happy to spend the rest of the day with Yang at the apartment. So even as she stepped out of the car and spotted reporters pulling up behind them, she still had a smile on her face. "Wise," one woman called, practically falling out of her van and rushing over. "Would you like to answer some questions for our read dash?" "Wise, our readers would like dash." Another man cut across her as four more approached with cameras, and their voices began to merge together into a cacophony of random noise. Deciding it was finally time to give them something, she stopped in front of the building doors and held up her hand. They all fell silent immediately, their eyes narrowing and their heads leaning forward like vultures ready to pounce on their meal. "You?" Weiss pointed to the first woman who had approached them. "You were at least polite in your asking. You have 2 questions. Better make them good." Yang grinned, leaning against the wall. "Thank you, Miss Schnee," the woman said gratefully, all of them pointing their microphone in a little closer. "Garnet Smithers from Celebrity Choice. I guess the first question our readers would like to know how new this is. You were seen together in Mistral, so did you meet there?" "No," Weiss said simply with a practiced smile. "Yang was simply accompanying me on a business trip. We began dating 7 months ago." 7 months, she said with an interested look. "That's a long time. Why exactly was it kept a secret for so long? And why reveal it now? And how long have you known you were homosexual?" "Pretty sure that's more than 2 questions." Yang chuckled amusedly. "And none for me?" Casting her a fond look, Weiss shook her head and turned back to the reporter. "I've known since I was a child," she said clearly. "And our relationship wasn't a secret, it was simply nobody's business but mine and Yang's. As for why reveal it to the public now, the simple answer is that we are happy and certain that this is something we are both serious about. Now is the right time. But that will be all." Not bothering to waste any more time in front of them, especially since all of them quickly began to ask more questions, Weiss took Yang's hand and entered the building. As she expected, almost all of them proceeded to follow them, but Yatsu was quick to press the security button the second they entered. They walked past the desk, causing the security gate to slam shut behind them. That didn't stop the questions though, but their voices were quickly drowned out once they stepped into the elevator and began to make their way up to their apartment. "They really are vultures," Yang breathed. "You even answered more questions than you said you would." "I could answer 100 questions and they would still have more," Weiss groaned. "At least we don't have to deal with them for the rest of the night though." "MHM," Yang hummed as she wrapped an arm around Weiss' shoulder. "Just me, you, the pool, and our swimsuits, if I can be bothered to wear one." "Well, you won't find me complaining regardless of your decision," Weiss purred and reached up to press a loving kiss against the woman's lips. "Especially after the effort you went through for this date." Yang shrugged with a confident smirk. "I had to make it special." "That you did." Weiss grinned as the elevator came to a stop and she began to walk out. "But every day with Y dash. Surprise!" "Ah!" The sudden eruption of noise and the mass of people in the rooms caused Weiss' heart to race as her mind flashed back to the debris-filled room of the Schnee Tower for the briefest of seconds, and in an instant Yang was standing protectively in front of her. The flashback was only brief, however, and before the smell of dirt and fire could even fall on her, she returned to her senses and placed a hand on her chest as she looked at the crowd to see nothing but familiar faces. Closest to the center of the room were Blake's son, John, and Nora, each with a drink in their hands and a smile on everyone but Blake's face. Neptune, Ilya, Ruby, Ren, and Piral were all slightly behind them, clearly having just stood up from the couch where they had been talking. Standing by the wall was Ty, Gyra, Callie, and sitting alone to the side by the large window was Whitley. Adorning the walls were banners and streamers reading congratulations, and a rainbow disco ball hung from the ceiling and cast the room in a myriad of colors. Before she could even take it all in, however, Nora grabbed a remote from behind her back and pressed a button, causing loud, upbeat music to pour from the speaker system. Without hesitation, Blake snatched the remote from the girl's hands and gave her boyfriend a light smack on the head with it. "I told you to make sure nobody shouts, idiot," she growled at him. "Ow! I'm sorry," he said quickly, rubbing his head despite obviously not being hurt. "Dumbass," Yang said with a shake of her head and turned around with concern in her eyes. "You okay?" "I'm fine," Weiss breathed, feeling her heart rate slow back down and shaking the remnants of the image from her head. "I swear." "All right." She smiled and turned back to the crowd. "So what's the party for?" "Isn't it obvious?" Nora cried happily, snatching the control back from Blake and turning the music up a bit more. "It's Weiss' coming out party." "My what?" Weiss asked with a raised eyebrow. "Ignore her," Blake grumbled and stepped away from the crowd. "Well, not entirely. It's more to celebrate you and Yang finally telling your dad, but I guess that means you came out too, so it works for both." Feeling Blake pull her into a small hug, Weiss happily returned it while looking at the guests, who had already begun to continue their conversations. The fact that so many people would turn up to celebrate her being happy was something that Weiss had never expected to happen to her. Even her brother, who rarely showed an interest, was there, even if he was sitting away from everyone and looking bored. So feeling a well of gratitude well in her chest, she tightened the hug a little. "Thank you for this," she said quietly, only to be surprised as Blake shook her head and pulled away. "Not my idea," Blake said loudly over the music and crooked a finger to an awkward-looking Ruby. "Thank her. She organized everything and got everyone here." "Do you like it?" the girl asked nervously as she approached. "Was it too much?" "Not at all," Weiss chuckled, giving the smaller girl a hug too. "I could have done without the shouting, but the rest is lovely." "Oh," Ruby replied. "Good, because I was worried that you wouldn't like it or that we shouldn't be in your home without your permission, but Yang said I could come over whenever I wanted, and I wanted to do something special for you and Yang telling your dad, and I've always liked parties so dash." "Rubes," Yang said, placing a hand on her sister's head and ruffling her hair. "You did good. No need to talk till you pass out, okay?" The girl took a deep breath and gave a nod, a proud smile pulling at her lips. "How did you get my brother to come though?" Weiss asked curiously. "Oh, Oscar did that for me. He's helping his aunt out though, so he's gotta be late." "Then I will make sure to thank him when he gets here," Weiss smiled. "Raven's here too, by the way," Blake chimed in with a sour look, earning a scowl from Yang. "She's in the kitchen avoiding Ty." "Then I should go and say hi," Yang hummed, taking her hand off Ruby and giving the girl a smile. "You want to come and meet Raven? You don't have to dash." "I want to," Ruby smiled with an eager nod, straightening out her hair. "Okay," Yang replied. "I'll have to ask her first as well, so wait by the wall, okay?" Ruby quickly gave another nod, and Yang poked her in the forehead before turning back around. "I won't be too long, babe." "Take your time," Weiss replied, pressing a brief kiss into her girlfriend's lips. "I'm going to mingle and talk to my brother anyway." "All right." Yang grinned happily. "Love you." "Love you too." With another short kiss, the woman walked away, and Weiss turned back to see Blake frowning. Despite Raven keeping to her words and sticking around, Weiss knew the Faunus didn't like the woman and still didn't trust her. "I think you have to start accepting this as a permanent thing," Weiss said with a slight shrug. A low sigh escaped the raven-haired woman as she shook her head. "Doesn't mean I like it," she groaned and turned away from the kitchen Yang had just disappeared into. "And sorry about the shouting. Son has the memory of a goldfish." "It's fine." Weiss shook her head again. "I should go and say hello to everyone though, since I guess this is my party." With a nod of understanding, Blake walked back over to Sun and Nora, Weiss in tow. It certainly hadn't been how she expected her afternoon to go, but hanging out with friends, who were happy for her, was definitely not something she was against. "Okay," Yang said, stopping just before the entryway to place a hand on her sister's shoulder. "You sure you want to meet her?" Yang was happy that an opportunity had finally presented itself. Ever since the meeting with Raven had turned out better than expected, she had been wondering how she would introduce the two. She wasn't stupid enough to believe the two would be close, as Raven had already made it clear she wasn't interested in mixing with that part of her life, but she did at least want the two to meet. And what better way than at a party they were both attending? "Yup," the girl replied without hesitation, a wide smile on her face. "Right," Yang hummed. "Well, it's probably just going to be a quick hi and bye, but just remember she can be a little difficult. So don't take anything she says personally. Okay?" "Got it," the redhead nodded. "Good." She grinned, ruffling the girl's hair again. "Just wait here a sec." As the girl straightened her hair, Yang gave the girl a proud smile and walked around the corner into the kitchen. Just as Blake had said, the woman was sitting alone at the food-filled island slowly sipping from a cup of tea. As usual, she was clad in red and black clothing, and her red eyes glinted dimly in the light as she looked up. Yang wasn't sure if it was a feeling that was ever going to go away, but there was still a hint of relief at seeing the smile on the woman's face. "You look tired." Yang smiled and made her way over to the opposite side of the island. "Sleeping properly?" "The same as usual," Raven said with a stifled yawn. "Just got off of my second mandatory overtime this week. Idiot boss screwed up the scheduling, and now we have to make up for it." "Damn," Yang grunted. Even though she knew Raven loved her bike, being forced to ride it back and forth all day would no doubt be tiring. "You thought about looking for somewhere else?" A dry chuckle escaped the woman's lips as she shook her head. "I'm an ex-convict that is still on parole, Yang. Not exactly many options for me out there." "I guess," she acknowledged as Raven let out another yawn, making a mental note to see if Weiss knew of anyone who would hire the woman. "You know you didn't have to come if you're tired. I wouldn't have dashed. I said I'd be here for the important things." Raven cut her off with a firm shake of her head. "And I know how important this moment is for you." Looking the woman in the eye, she saw determination there. It felt good to know that the relationship between them was strong enough that Raven was willing to risk exhaustion just keep her word. "Then thanks for coming," she smiled. "Especially since my dad is here too." "MHM." The biker grunted and sipped her tea. "I hate that he still looks like he did in school." "I don't." Yang grinned, hoping to cheer the woman up a little. "I've got your looks and his youthfulness, so I'm gonna stay young and beautiful forever." It worked, and the chuckle that came from the older Branwyn twin was enough to make Yang laugh too. "Well, I'm glad everything worked out in the end then." Giving the woman a happy smile, Yang happily accepted the drink and took a sip herself. As she expected, it tasted exactly like the one she would usually show up with when they met, and she had quickly come to believe the woman kept a few tea bags with her at all times. She could hardly blame her though, since it was really good. "Seriously though," she said and handed the tea back. "Thank you for coming. It means a lot. But I do have something to ask." Life has taught me that is generally a lead into an uncomfortable conversation, but go ahead. "Sort of." Yang scratched the back of her head. "So I know you don't really want to mingle with my dad, and I totally get that and won't ask you to. But Ruby is someone I share every part of my life with, and she's waiting just outside, and I would really like her to meet you. If you don't want to, then that's fine, but I just wanted to ask." Raven didn't reply immediately. Instead, she simply sat there drinking her tea while thinking. Yang knew it was a big ask of Raven, since Ruby was the daughter of two people that betrayed her, but she really hoped she would say yes. Thankfully, after a minute of thought, the woman gave a nod and crossed her arms, her guard immediately back up. "Fine," she said. "I'll meet her. But if you're EXP dash." "I'm not expecting anything," Yang clarified, already prepared for that. "I just want her to know who you are so she doesn't feel like I'm keeping something from her." "Very well." The woman sighed and leaned forward. "Whenever you're ready then." "All right." Yang smiled gratefully and leaned backwards to see Ruby's head discreetly poking into the room. "You can come in, Rubes." The small girl slowly walked out from behind the wall, clearly nervous by the way she was wringing her hands. With small steps, she made her way over while looking at the woman with curious silver eyes, until she finally sat beside Yang at the island. After a second of watching the girl fiddle with her fingers, Yang reached out and put a hand over them. Of course, she had expected Ruby's confidence to fade the second it came to actually sitting in front of Raven. It almost always did when the girl met new people. However, it had been some time since she had seen the girl get this nervous. Usually she was just a little quiet, or would hang back a little, but she would always at least try to look at them instead of staring intently at her hands. "Ruby," Yang said, keeping her voice level since it always made the girl feel more comfortable. "This is Raven." "Hello, Miss Bramwin." Ruby's voice was so quiet that it could barely be heard over the music. "It's nice to meet you." Looking up from her sister, Yang saw Raven looking at the girl with a little confusion, as if what was sitting in front of her was something she didn't expect. "It's good to meet you too." It wasn't much, but Yang knew it was better than nothing. "So is there anything you want to ask her? Or me? Or both of us?" Yang asked. "I'm not keeping any of this from you, so ask away." "Oh, The redhead fiddled with her fingers and little but took a visible breath and looked up at Raven. "Just one. If you don't mind." Curiosity entered the raven-haired woman's eyes, but she didn't reply. Instead, she simply gave a wave of her hand and leaned back into her chair a little as she waited for the question. With permission granted, it didn't take long for Ruby to gather her confidence. Are you staying in Vale?" Raven's eyes widened a little in surprise, and Yang knew hers did the same. "It's just that Yang seems really happy that you're here, and I don't want that to change for her." A tired look entered Raven's eyes, different from the general fatigue she had been feeling before. It was a little more irritated, and Yang could understand why. Despite everything she had done to prove she was staying, the relationship between them meant something to her. Pretty much everyone in Yang's life still doubted her. Her dad, Blake, Ilya, Gyra, and now Ruby was another. "I understand your skepticism, Rose," Raven said, clearly trying to be kind, but not doing a very good job of hiding the slight edge to her voice. "But I very much intend to stay here for the foreseeable future. Once my parole is over, I may start looking for jobs elsewhere." She paused for a second and glanced at Yang. "But no matter where I am, I do not intend to hurt Yang any more than I have." The two locked eyes and stared each other down for a few seconds, and Yang stayed quiet. It was unusual for the girl to willingly make eye contact, especially with people she didn't know, but Yang supposed she could understand why the question had been asked and why Ruby was taking it so seriously. After all, Yang would be exactly the same if the roles were reversed. So knowing that it was something Ruby needed to figure out for herself, she chose not to interfere. It wasn't long before Ruby looked away though. Even under the best of circumstances she wouldn't last long, but regardless of her mood, Raven's eyes always held a certain intensity. Fortunately, Ruby seemed to get what she needed as a smile spread across her face, and she gave a small nod. "Good." The girl grinned and held out her hand. Despite looking at it, Raven didn't take it and Ruby quickly pulled it away. "Then I'm happy you're part of Yang's life." "So am I," Raven said with a sidelong look. "Me too," Yang echoed, giving Ruby a side hug. "Anything else?" Ruby gave a nervous look between them and looked down at her hands. Her voice fell a little before continuing. "I'm really sorry for what my mom did to you." That one did catch Yang by surprise. As far as she was aware, nobody had told Ruby a single thing about what had happened between Ty, Summer, and Raven, so the fact the girl even knew about it was concerning. Though she had never believed Summer to be an angel, she had made damn sure that Ruby had all the best memories that she could give her. More concerning was that Ruby felt she needed to apologize for it, which was something she was definitely going to rectify. "She isn't here to say it, but I know she would say " "Stop!" Yang cut her off abruptly. With worried eyes, the redhead looked up at her. "How do you even know about that?" "I heard you and Dad talking." Yang swore internally. "Well, what Mom and Dad did is on them. It's them that should be apologizing." "But Mom can't apologize." "That doesn't matter," Yang said, giving the girl a firm look. "It's not your responsibility to make up for what our parents did. Okay?" The smaller girl hesitated for a second, her posture slacking a bit as her eyes filled without doubt. Thankfully, though, she didn't fight back and only gave an accepting nod. "Good." She breathed and let her go. but you should go back to the other room. Are you mad at Dash? No. Yang cut her off again with a gentle smile. I just need to talk to Raven about some things. Now go. Ilya could probably use the company before Nep hits on her or something. Ugh, he's the worst, Ruby said jokingly and pushed herself away from the table. Bye, Miss Bramlin. Bye, Raven said dully. The moment Ruby left the room, Yang turned to Raven and saw that the tiredness in her eyes had increased. She knew that the past was something the woman didn't like bringing up unless necessary, and that her mood usually soured when it was brought up. I see she is more than just a spitting image of Summer, Raven said with a little bitterness in her voice. Hey! Yang scowled at the woman. She was just doing what she thought was right. Don't take your issues with Summer out on her. She definitely wasn't going to let anyone badmouth Ruby. Not even Raven. I didn't mean it like that. The woman sighed and ran a hand over her face. Look, I'm tired, all right. It would probably be better if we just don't talk about it anymore. Fine. Yang agreed and stood up. But unless you want to spend the entire night here alone, then you should probably come in the front room. It's large enough to avoid Dad still, trust me. I've been here 3 times now. Raven breathed, but didn't move. I know how large it is. But I'm fine being alone. Better than inevitable causing a scene. Your choice, I guess. She hummed and picked up a few small cakes from the table, passing one to the grumpy woman. But the invite's open, and I would like you to come out and maybe meet some of my friends. Quite a few are from Mistral, so you have some things in common. I'll think about it. Raven hummed and bit into the cake. Just let my headache go away first. Okay, Yang said. You can stay here tonight too. If you're as tired as you say, then I don't want you driving. I can drive you, Dash. Yang cut her off with a firm look, and the woman gave a shake of her head. If you insist, then sure. Good. A little upset at how abruptly that had taken a turn and wondering if that really had been the best time to introduce Ruby to Raven, Yang let out a small sigh and walked out of the room. She would definitely not be asking them to talk to each other again. I don't like your friends. Whitley scowled, straightening out his jacket as Nora bounced back over to Rin and threw her arms around him. Too clingy. For the past 10 minutes, Nora and Sun had been hanging around and fawning over the boy. And while Sun had been relatively reserved compared to how he usually was with Neptune and John, Nora had shown no such consideration. Almost the second she arrived at the table, she'd hugged him from behind and quickly taken to calling him cute boy Weiss. That's just Nora, Weiss chuckled. She's sweet when you get to know her. I'd rather not. The boy groaned, straightening his tie. If he was going to be late, then why even invite me to this thing? Relax, I'm sure he'll be here soon. He simply gave a disgruntled hum in response. I like that you have a friend, though. It's been good to see you more relaxed. Yes, well, I suppose the peace I have enjoyed is about to come to an end. As soon as Father figures out a plan. I'm sorry you'll be caught in this, Weiss said sadly, reaching out to take her brother's hand. But you can stay here whenever you want if you need a break from him. I'm more likely to need a break from the Willow than him, he mumbled. Her attempts to bond are irritating. Though Weiss wanted to comment and tell him that their mother was simply trying to bond with him, she didn't. It had become increasingly clear to her from how Whitley was constantly fighting back that the way she had fixed the relationship with her brother would not work for her mother. They needed to find their own way, so instead of correcting him, she simply gave him a smile. If that is what you need it for, then feel free. It has plenty of spare rooms. Yes, our sister did go rather overboard with this. Winter tends to go overboard with a lot of things. Weiss grinned, looking around the massive room at all the guests having fun. But it's definitely nice for moments like this. Though it was still rather reserved, the party had become a little more upbeat in the last hour. With much alcohol having been consumed, John, Neptune, and Piral were all a little bit louder as they told jokes and caught up on their week. Meanwhile, Ruby, Yang, and Blake were all on the couch, the redhead cuddled happily into the blonde. While she would have loved to have joined them, Yang had told her what had happened with Raven in the kitchen, and knew the three of them could use some sisterly time together. Nora, Sun, and Ren on the other hand were standing talking to Tai and Gyra, the two boys talking to the adults about some kind of sport, while Nora draped herself over Ren's shoulders without a care in the world. Though she could definitely be a bit much at times, Nora's carefree approach to life was one she was definitely a little jealous of. Raven had finally left the kitchen too, though not by much. She was still leaning against the entry to it, but she seemed to at least be enjoying a conversation with Callie, though it was always hard to tell with her. The one that stuck out to Weiss though was Ilya, who seemed to have caught her looking around the room and peeled herself away from the talk about Neptune's deal to make her way over to them. For the first time in weeks, there was no blue to be seen on her. Not another one. Be nice, Weiss hissed at the boy. Hey, Weiss, Ilya said, a hint of a smile on her face. Mind if I join you two for a bit? Me? Weiss asked in surprise. You must be really tired of Neptune talking about his abs? His deals with a swimwear company. He won't shut up about how he can't get them. The girl groaned, sitting down in the spare chair and setting her plate of food down. Like, what's even so good about the damn things? Yangs are pre. She blushed and stopped talking as both Ilya and Whitley raised an eyebrow at her. Her fascination with Yang's muscular form was definitely not for them to hear about. I mean, I don't know. This is my brother, by the way, Whitley. Taking a sip of her coffee and hoping neither would press her on what was said, she watched the two exchange a brief nod of acknowledgement. Hi, she said cautiously, though it was clear that it wasn't an invite for them to talk. Not that Whitley cared, only giving a hum in response and continuing to eat the burger Yang had made for him earlier. But I actually wanted to talk about what we discussed earlier too, Ilya said with a sigh. I decided not to do it. Oh. You were right before, the girl said with a sad tone. It wouldn't work. All I would do is cause problems for you and Yang. It's your right to cause them, Weiss clarified quickly. But I understand, I guess. I will promise you that he will pay for what he did, though. I will be seeing to that personally. Please do, the girl said, standing up and giving her a genuine smile. And congrats on coming out to your dad. I know it probably wasn't easy, but at least you can be open about yourself now. Thanks, Weiss smiled. It might not have been much, but at least there was one thing the two of them could connect on. Thankfully, the cautious smile on Ilya's face turned into a real one, the girl's freckles and eyes turning a pleasant shade of lilac that matched Yang's exactly. With a slight wave goodbye, the girl turned and walked away, dodging Yang as she left. While Weiss was sure that the problems between them were definitely not forgotten, it was good to know that the two of them could still have pleasant conversations. Purple? The blonde said with interest in her voice, taking the Ilya had previously occupied. Haven't seen that one in a while. I don't know what that color means to her. Means she's happy, Yang explained and scooted over to throw an arm around her. Was totally influenced by me, not that she'll ever admit that. Probably because you'll never let her live it down, Weiss chuckled. You know me so well. The boxer grinned, placing a brief kiss on her lips before turning to Whitley. So how's the burger, Runt? Acceptable. Whitley shrugged, thoroughly uninterested in their public displays of affection. From him, that is a glowing review, Weiss clarified. Well, I'd have ordered that rim burger you apparently like, but their delivery is trash. You'd starve to death before it arrives. I wouldn't know. My assistant picks them up for me. You have an assistant? Of course, Whitley said, leaning back and peeling a piece of the meat away from the bun as a smirk pulled at his lips. You don't? Whitley. He's fine, babe. Yang laughed. I like his snark. My what? I have no idea either. Weiss shocked her head as Yang chuckled to herself. So how is Ruby? She's good. Yang shrugged, looking over to the younger girl who had been joined by Ilya, the two of them happily conversing together. Probably better now. Weiss, too, had noticed just how close the two girls had become lately. Having spent a lot of time in the coffee store in the last few days, there had been multiple times a day where she would look over from their spot on the couch and see the two laughing away behind the counter. Even from across the room, and even now, the bright pink of Ilya's freckles had always been obvious, so Weiss was fairly certain that Ilya was interested in Ruby, but she wasn't sure if the feeling was mutual. Though, given how extremely obvious Ilya was, Ruby almost certainly knew and wasn't seemingly doing anything to dissuade her. What is happening with those two anyway? She asked curiously. Honestly, I doubt even they know. The woman grinned. Fun to watch though. You're such a good sister. I know. Yang stuck out her tongue. All right, boys and girls. The sudden loud noise cut across the music and caused Weiss to jump a little. Looking to her side, She saw Nora once again pointing the remote at the television to turn the music down, while Pyrrha held an embarrassed hand over her face. Every head in the room was turned to her, and she was holding out 2 glasses of what looked to be champagne. Speech time! The excitable girl bounced up and down eagerly, and John quickly reached out and took the drinks from her and brought them to their table. Thanking the boy, Weiss gave a sidelong look to Yang, who simply shrugged with a smile and motioned for her to stand up. Given that she had not even known she would be attending a party, she had no idea what she was going to say as she stood up and watched every eye in the room turn to look at her expectantly. "Hello, everyone," she said with a smile, her nerves non-existent due to all the meetings she'd led. "I'll try not to keep you from your drinks and conversations for too long. Beer's right here, so take your time," Son called, Blake poking him in the stomach with a smile. "Well, there is quite a lot I could say, but I won't. Instead, I will simply thank you all for coming here tonight. Given how complicated my life is, I was never really sure that a moment like this would come for me, and I certainly wasn't expecting there to be so many people here to support me when it did, but meeting Yang has changed so much in my life." She reached back and took Yang's hand, the woman standing up and giving her a wide grin. "And though I know the things I feared are still coming for us, there isn't a single moment of being with you that I would take back." She turned to look at the blonde and gave her a soft smile. "I love you, Yang Xiaolong." "Aw," Yang cooed, gazing lovingly down at her. "You're such a sap." "Yang!" Ruby, Nora, and Blake shouted at her, causing both Weiss and Yang to laugh. "Relax," she replied, an arm coming out and slipping around her waist to pull her close. "I love you too, Weiss Schnee." Feeling a grin spread from ear to ear, she pushed herself up onto her toes and pressed her lips against Yang's. As Oz came from their friends, a feeling of warmth rushed through her body, and she let herself melt into the woman's arms for the few seconds that the kiss lasted. She really had never expected to be able to do something so openly, but she could honestly say that the feeling of relief was something she wished she could have felt sooner. Eventually, though, they pulled apart and Weiss was left gazing happily up at her beautiful girlfriend. "All right, you purrs," Yang called out to the crowd, a wide smile on her face. "Back to your business. Let's kick this party up a notch, shall we?" "I'll definitely drink to that," Neptune agreed and held up his beer. "To finding love, and using it as an excuse to have a great party." The crowd laughed, and Weiss rolled her eyes and joined in the toast, taking a small sip of the champagne as the music was turned back up. Pressing her head lightly against Yang's chest, she breathed in the intoxicating smell and let the sounds of everyone having fun envelope them, as a single wish came to her mind. If only this could last forever. Chapter 76, Invitation. Just as she had done all week, Weiss awoke from her sleep with a smile on her face. Though she could feel that Yang was definitely not in the bed, the scent of the woman's lavender shampoo still filled her nose and kept her wonderful dream lingering a little longer. Thankfully, it had been a dream she had many times before, so it was rather easy to hang on to the feeling of joy that pulsed through her as she sat up and wiped her eyes free of sleep, wondering where her girlfriend had gone to. Though it used to be rather uncommon for her to wake up with the blonde at her side, since their secrecy had usually caused them both to want to enjoy as much time together as they could, it had become a lot more frequent as of late. Of course, she wasn't so needy that she required Yang to stay in bed every morning until she woke up, but she did miss that little bit of extra cuddle time. Thankfully, she knew she wouldn't have to look very far to find her girlfriend, since she was usually either in the kitchen or the workout room, both of which she had been spending a little more time in lately. So, yawning slightly and stretching her arms above her head, she pushed herself out of bed and walked to the bathroom to clean up a little before tracking down her girlfriend. 15 minutes later, she stepped out of the shower and dried herself off. With only one trip planned for the day, to deliver some coursework to her professor in an hour, she let out a breath of relief and settled for a simple white camisole and thigh-length skirt before leaving the bathroom. Just like usual, it really didn't take long to find the beautiful blonde, but it was definitely not in a place she had expected. Instead of the gym or kitchen like usual, the woman was doing laps in the pool, her wet hair shining in the bright sun that had been shining down on the city for the past few days. Lowering her legs into the warm water, she quietly sat on its edge to watch her girlfriend finish her morning workout. Just like watching the woman cook, there was something relaxing about watching the boxer workout. Something in the way she made it look so effortless, like it was the most natural thing in the world, helped Weiss tune out and simply enjoy the moment. Sadly though, It appeared she had taken a little too long in the shower and arrived towards the end, as Yang's breast strokes came to a stop after only a few minutes. Morning. She smiled at the blonde, pulling her scroll out to check her emails. Wow. Yang chuckled, treading water as she drifted over. The second I stop swimming, you look away. Starting to feel like a trophy girlfriend here. Good. Weiss smirked, looking over the top of her scroll at the beaming woman. Great girlfriends deserve a trophy. Well, my birthday is in a few months. Certainly a lot cheaper than the 5-star resort on a secluded beach of Vacuo that I had planned. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's not be crazy now. Yang laughed mischievously as she reached the edge, her hands landing on Weiss' shins and gently moving a finger up and down. You can give me my trophy there too. Rolling her eyes and shaking her head, Weiss leaned down and pressed her lips against her girlfriend's. So has Fletch replied yet? The woman asked as they parted. Nope. She sighed and put her scroll aside. I wish he would hurry up already. MMM. Yang hummed, pressing her lips against Weiss' thigh. You know he's gonna accept. He'd be stupid not to, so you just gotta wait for his email. I know. Weiss smiled and reached down to play with Yang's hair. I'm just getting impatient, I guess. MMM, then maybe I should help you relax? As Yang pressed her lips against her thigh again, Weiss let out a happy groan and moved her hand cupped her girlfriend's cheek. Though the offer was definitely tempting, she was unfortunately going to have to refuse. Why you know I love that? I just started, she said sadly. Stupid periods. Yang bumped and sank below the water a little. My checking my emails then? My hands are kind of wet here, and not the reason I wanted. You are so gross. Weiss laughed and picked up her scroll as Yang gave her an impish grin. Typing in Yang's email and password as the woman pushed off from the edge and began to swim away, Weiss slowly scrolled through the inbox and found the one she knew Yang had likely wanted her to check for. Though most of them were failed job applications, some from college and others being random newsletters, one of them stood out as an email address she recognized. Opening it, she scanned over the information. You got one from Dr. Dark. It says your appointment is in 3 days, at 12. K. Mind forwarding it to my dad for me? MHM. Weiss hummed and forwarded it. Shouldn't you be getting ready for college already? Nah. The woman shrugged. Professor's sick, so the first class was canceled. Wish I had the day off, like you. You just had a week off. Weiss grinned down at her. Why do you want more? To spend more time with you. She smiled and stuck out her tongue. Shaking her head, Weiss reached out and poked it, causing the woman to pull a funny face and shake her own head. Water sprayed everywhere, and she pulled her arm back to cover her face as a loud laugh escaped her. Gaw! Yawn! Stop! She laughed, brushing herself off and scowled playfully at her girlfriend. Why are you such an animal? You tasted like soap. The blonde pouted and wiped her tongue with her hand. Ugh, well now I need to get changed. Weiss groaned, peeling the wet camisole away from her chest. Oh! The smile on Yang's face sent a wave of worry through Weiss. Don't you dash. Too late. The woman had already cupped her hands together and pushed some water out of the pool. Feeling it crash into her chest, she raised her hands as the rest of her clothes were soaked through. If her top hadn't been see-through before, it definitely was now, and Yang had already pushed herself back into the middle of the pool with a maniacal chuckle. You are so dead, Yang Xiaolong. MHM. Sure. The girl chuckled. You'll have to come and get me first. Weiss definitely considered it. Her clothes were already wet, and she was going to have to wash the chlorine off her legs anyway. However, she decided against it. A full shower would be much more time-consuming than quick wipe down of her legs and a change of attire. Besides, there was something else she could use as a punishment. I don't think I will, Weiss said smugly and stood up. Instead, I will go and change my clothes. I'm thinking maybe some jeans, or a really long skirt. Yang let out an offended gasp. That's even more cruel. Sticking her tongue out, Weiss turned away from the blonde and bent over to grab a nearby towel to pat down her legs. Glancing between her legs, she saw Yang watching her intently, so stood back up and threw the cloth at her. Pervert! You know it. Weiss chuckled. Well, I am going to get cleaned up, again, she said, feeling her clothes stick to her and deciding it was a good idea not to jump in. I will pick Ruby up when she finishes classes. Maybe take her shopping for a bit. Aight. My final class ends at 2. Okay. I won't say a word until you're there. I know. Yang smiled back. Now go get dressed. Don't want you to be late. Nodding at the blonde and blowing her a kiss, Wise turned away from her and walked back inside to get ready. Leaning back against the trunk of the car and sipping her coffee, Wise kept a keen eye on the gate in front of her and thought through the discussion she was going to be having in just over an hour. From what Yang had said about the girl hiding things, Ruby was just as reluctant to ask for help, so Wise knew it wasn't exactly going to be easy to get the girl to accept hundreds of thousands of lien. What made it even more difficult was that, while she and Yang had decided to be as open and honest with Ruby as possible, Yang had firmly decided that Ruby wasn't to know that it was them that leaked the documents to the press. Wise couldn't help but agree that it was a good choice. Though she would never believe that Ruby would ever tell anyone on purpose, the girl had slipped up more than a few times and revealed their relationship to people. And while thankfully nothing had ever come of it, the fact that she was going to be hounded by reporters and more out of her element than usual made them a little concerned that something could accidentally slip out one day. Unfortunately, though, that made Wise's goal even harder to achieve. She wasn't able to tell Ruby why she was so interested in making sure she could go to her dream college. She wasn't able to tell her that it was her fault and that she wanted to make amends. Instead, she was going to have to try and convince the girl to let her try to fix someone else's mistake. It wasn't impossible, but given that she was raised by Yang, there was bound to be some amount of stubbornness there. She just hoped the girl would ultimately accept. Sadly, she didn't really have much time to think as the main doors to the school opened and students began to file out. Having attended a private academy with a strict uniform code, it was still weird seeing everyone wearing their casual attire. As they all filed out of the building, Wise saw more than a few cast their eyes in her direction and whisper amongst themselves. Finally, though, after almost 5 minutes, Ruby and Oscar walked out of the doors surrounded by people. To say Ruby looked uncomfortable would be an understatement, and Wise definitely knew why as she recognized 2 of the girls from the school's tour of the STC. They had been the ones insulting the girl behind her back by throwing snide remarks, and clearly not for the first time. Yet here they were, displaying the same behavior Wise had experienced her whole life, attempting to use Ruby to get what they wanted, something Wise would never give them. "Hi, Wise," she said meekly as they all reached the car. "What were you doing here?" "I figured we could hang out for a bit while Yang is in class," she replied warmly. "Good day at school?" "Could be better," Oscar grumbled. Understandable," Wise smiled. "At least you only had to put up with these snakes for half a day." The smile immediately faded from the group's faces and was replaced with a scowl. "What did you just call us?" one girl said in a bitter tone. "We're Ruby's friends, and she isn't going to Ladash." "Hazel," Wise called, ignoring her and taking a sip of her drink. "Would you take Ruby and Oscar's bags, please?" As the car door opened and Hazel stepped out, the girl immediately fell silent and took a step back. Wise could hardly blame her, as the sudden appearance of an 8-foot-tall man was generally a little intimidating. Making his way around the car, he took the bags and placed them in the trunk before returning to the car. "We should be going, shouldn't we?" Wise asked the pair and pulled the side door open. "I can drop you off at home first, Oscar." With little more than a nod, the 2 stepped into the car and began to buckle themselves in. Closing it slightly, she finally addressed the small group with cold eyes and an impatient tone. She hated channeling Jacques, but she was definitely not going to stand by and let this treatment of Ruby continue. "I have known Ruby for 7 months now," she said in a low tone. "I know all of her friends, and am fully aware that people have been giving her a hard time at school. But I highly recommend that it ends now, before I get involved. After all, I'm sure you wouldn't want your college of choice to find out what kind of a person they're considering, would you?" There was no reply, but there were definitely a few worried looks amongst the group. Though she was sure her threat might not have scared everyone, the ones that did would almost definitely do their best to keep the others in line for fear of being seen as aiding them. It wasn't something Wise was proud of knowing how to exploit, but Ruby was important to her, and the girl didn't deserve to be bullied and harassed for being different. So without bothering to look back at them, she stepped into the car and took her seat beside the pair. "Did you enjoy that?" Wise asked curiously as they stepped out of the robotics store. "It was fun." Though the word sounded sincere, Wise couldn't help notice the lack of enthusiasm in the girl's tone. In fact, she had noticed that a lot over the past 2 hours. No matter what store they went into, or how many new devices they inspected, Ruby's mind always seemed elsewhere. Even when Weiss had tried to engage her in conversation about them, the girl had only given a brief overview before falling quiet again. And while she knew it wasn't uncommon for Ruby to be quiet around some people, she had never been quiet around her. "I'm glad," she smiled, though Ruby kept looking down at her feet. "Is there anywhere else you would like to go?" "I dunno," she mumbled. "Anywhere's fine." There's a bakery around the corner. We could pick up some cookies while we wait for Jan to get here?" "Sure." If Ruby wasn't excited about cookies, then there was definitely something wrong. Usually, the mere mention of the baked good would be enough to have her bouncing all over the place, but there was nothing. So as they turned the corner and pushed their way into the store, she placed a hand on the girl's shoulder and offered her a warm smile. "Are you okay?" she asked carefully. She had no experience with Ruby being like this, and didn't want to misstep. "You seemed a little quiet today." "Huh?" She looked up from a pack of cookies. "Oh, sorry. Just thinking about stuff." "Those kids?" Ruby turned back to the cookies. Why yeah." As much as it sucked that the girl was going through it, Weiss was glad it was at least something she had experience with. "You know, I had to deal with the same thing when I was at school." "Really?" she asked quietly. "But you're, well, Weiss Schnee." "That's exactly why they would try to latch onto me," she explained. "And why they are trying to latch onto you. They think that being in any way associated with someone as powerful as a Schnee, that they will somehow be just as powerful. It's disgusting and greedy behavior." "It sucks," she agreed with a small nod. "I don't want to be their friend." "And you don't have to be," Weiss said reassuringly. "Just ignore them, and if they get too much, tell your principal. And focus on your real friends, like Oscar and Penny and Ilya." "Right." Ruby put the cookies back. "Ilya." The uncertain inflection on Ruby's words confused Weiss a little, since as far as she knew the two were getting along great. Before she could ask, however, the tinkling of the doorbell chimed, and she turned to see Jan walking through it with a bright smile on her face. A smile so bright that it matched the unzipped, yellow motorcycle jacket and the short crop top underneath. "Sup, nerds?" She grinned, walking over and putting her arm around Ruby's shoulder and pulling her into a hug. For as low as the girl's mood was, it still seemed to pull a slight smile from her. "Guess who aced her makeup test?" "And called us the nerds?" Weiss said amusedly, moving in to press a kiss against her lips. "'Cause you are," she beamed happily. "But I love nerds, so I'm cool with it." "MHM," Weiss hummed and gave her another kiss. "Good job on the test." "Thank you. Thank you. Aren't you proud of your big sis, Rubles?" "Very proud," she grumbled, trying to push Yang's arm off her. "About time you got an A." "Wow. Rude." Pressing a kiss against the top of the girl's head, Yang let Ruby go and picked up a few bags of strawberry and cream cookies. Passing them at the redhead, she handed over some lean cards and motioned towards the counter. With a groan, the girl accepted the money and moved towards the cashier, though not before grabbing a large bag of triple chocolate cookies from a nearby shelf. "She okay?" Yang asked and turned her back to the counter, her smile falling immediately. "She's acting odd." Though she knew she shouldn't be, Weiss still found herself surprised at how well Yang knew her sister, and wished she could be the same with Whitley. "Some kids at school are trying to be friends with her," Weiss explained. "Bothering her quite a bit." "Bitches?" Weiss gave her a nod. "Assholes. Blake said she was distracted yesterday too. I'll have a word with them next time I pick her up." "No need," she reassured her girlfriend and put a hand on her chest. "I already had words with them." "Poor kids." Jan grinned. Shaking her head, Weiss pressed in and let her hands slip under the sides of her girlfriend's open. Tracing the heel tattoo beneath with her finger, she let out a hungry hum and reached up to kiss her properly, ignoring the sudden flash in the corner of her eye. As they pulled apart though, Yang's eyes darted to the window, where a man was holding up a large camera. "Damn, thought I lost them," she sighed. 3 vans were waiting for me outside of my college. Probably because they lost me when I left the apartment," Weiss theorized. "Sorry." "Not your fault," the woman smiled. "I'll just take a few more corners next time." "It's not a big deal if they do follow us," Weiss hummed, smiling up at the blonde. It's not like we are hiding anymore. Fair point. Yang smiled and turned to Ruby, dismissing the lean that was handed to her. So you two ready to get some lunch? Seemingly cheering up slightly, as she nibbled on a strawberry and cream cookie, Ruby gave a small nod. However, the second they stepped outside, the black-haired reporter stepped up to them, pulling a recorder from his pocket and letting his camera dangle around his neck. Doing their best to ignore him, they continued down the street towards a nearby Greenville location. Unfortunately, the man didn't seem to take the hint. Yang, he said, matching their pace. Carrie Blanche with vital news. Can I ask you some questions? Sorry, dude. Yang brushed him off. We're going to get lunch. Maybe later. Of course. Then man nodded, though Weiss knew he absolutely was not done. I simply thought you might like to comment as to why your name appears on the White Fan Registry before publication tomorrow morning. That one made them stop. It wasn't like they hadn't been expecting that at some point. On the contrary, Weiss was surprised it hadn't been revealed yet, but she was still caught off guard by the question. Especially since, if there was anything that would cause Jacques to speed up his game, it would be that seeing she wasn't the only one caught off guard either, as Yang looked at her with a little uncertainty in her eyes. However, Weiss knew it would be no good to deny it. The truth would come out, and it was always better to get ahead of it. So giving Yang a nod, as the man held up the recorder, she watched the blonde take a deep breath and nod. I was in the White Fan, Yang said slowly. But it was a long time ago, and something I consider a huge mistake. So what made you join? I was young and angry, Yang replied simply, though she nervously gave a scratch of her head. I'd seen my best friend discriminated against for years, and I thought that by joining I would be helping stop that. When you say your best friend, I assume you mean Blake Belladonna? He asked curiously, clearly happy that they were giving him some info. Who recently re-registered herself as an active White Fan member. Yeah. And as her friend, do you support her choice? Yang paused for a minute, clearly trying to think of what to say without screwing up. After a couple of seconds though, her eyes glanced to the side in clear plea for help. We are both uneasy with Blake's decision and wish she had chosen something else, Weiss admitted. However, we are also aware that the registry is narrow in its definition and is in need of reform, as it does not make a distinction between those who intend to cause harm and those who intend to help their community through peaceful means. We can say with full confidence that Blake is the latter. Interesting. So you're saying you've known about your girlfriend's past before now? I have known since the beginning of our relationship, Weiss confirmed. Yang has never hidden anything from me, and I have accepted her past for what it was. A mistake. Now, if you would not mind, we very much would like to eat now. Right, the man replied, pocketing his device and moving out of the way. Enjoy your meal, Miss Schnee. Giving the man a nod, out of courtesy, not respect, they continued on their way. As precise as her answers had been, she knew they would not appear so in the magazine. They never did. They always found some way to twist them, to exploit them, and make it sound much worse than intended, but Weiss was used to that by now. Thankfully, unlike most reporters, the man actually allowed them to continue undisturbed, though that was likely only because he had gotten what he needed. Knowing there was nothing she could do to stop it now, and that it would have been warped regardless, she put it out of her mind and pushed her way into Greenville. It was one of the smaller locations, but the atmosphere was still a rather comfortable one with its dark wood and green accents. Sat at the tables were a few faces she recognized, each one giving her an intrigued look as she walked through the door, but none of them breaking the unspoken understanding of Greenville, that everyone there wanted to be left in peace. Taking their seat at one of the open tables, Weiss pulled the menu from its stand and passed it to Ruby. Order whatever you want, she smiled. Their desserts are amazing. Thanks, the girl nodded, scanning over the menu. Same as last time? Weiss asked her girlfriend. You know me so well. Grinning as an arm was wrapped around her, she let herself melt slightly into the muscular woman. So, Ruby, she started in a friendly voice. Yang tells me you have finally finished your volunteering? I'm sure it feels good to have some free time again. MHM, the girl hummed as she scoured the menu. I finally managed to organize my laptops and fix a few of them. That's great news. Are you thinking about selling them? Yang chuckled and pressed the button on the side of the table to call the waiter. She doesn't sell them, she just takes them apart again. Well, how else do you learn? Ruby asked in confusion. But I think I might sell these ones. And I accidentally turned a few of them into a working PC. How do you accidentally turn laptops into a PC? Yang scoffed. The smaller girl gave a shrug. I was trying to see if I could, and I got carried away. But it's taking up a lot of space, and I need the money for when I go to Beacon, so maybe. Seeing it as a perfect opportunity to launch into what she wanted to talk about, Weiss gave Yang a small look. Clearly understanding what was about to happen, she gave a small nod and removed her arm, allowing Weiss to sit up straight and prepare herself. Actually, Beacon is what I wanted to talk to you about, she said slowly. However, before she could go any further, the waiter arrived and pulled out his pad while looking at them expectantly. Quickly relaying their order to him, he gave them a small bow and disappeared back behind the bar. Turning back to the girl, she saw curiosity behind her eyes. What about it? Well, Weiss let out a small breath, unsure as to how she was going to say it. Usually, she would be blunt and honest, just as she had been taught, but clearly that was not the best approach when it came to more personal matters. After all, it had practically blown up in her face with Ilya. Do you remember everything that happened with the STC recently? The bribery stuff? Yes, Weiss said with a slow nod. So, because of that, and the response by the Atlas branch of the White Fang, a number of establishments have decided to distance themselves from us for a little while. Beacon being one of them. Oh, Ruby frowned. That sucks. But what does that have to do with me? Well, Weiss paused again and looked to Yang, who looked down at the table. Knowing she couldn't put it off any longer, she shook her head and let out a short sigh. You see, the STC contributes a lot of money to Beacon every year, a vast majority of which goes to Beacon's scholarship program. And since Beacon are distancing themselves from us in order to keep their students safe, there are no scholarships, Ruby finished, despite the look in her eyes showing that she already knew the answer. Seeing the disappointment flood the girl's eyes hurt. She was the one who had convinced the girl to try. She was the one who had told her to go after it and given her the hope of getting into her dream college, all because she knew Ruby deserved to be there. And that was why she had to make it right. Not only because it was her fault the girl couldn't go, but also because Beacon was where Ruby belonged. I'm sorry, Weiss replied and reached out to rest her hand over Ruby's. But you can still go to Beacon. How? Ruby mumbled at the table. Dad can't afford it without a scholarship. I know, she nodded. And that is why I would like to pay for you to go. Almost instantly, Ruby's head shot up, and a familiar reluctance entered her eyes. Weiss had seen that very same look numerous times from Yang, and knew what was about to come. She also knew that if Ruby even uttered the word no, then Yang would shut the conversation down immediately. So before the girl could say anything, Weiss continued. I know you want to do this alone, but you belong in Beacon, she said honestly. You deserve to be able to go to Beacon where your brilliance can shine and get you where you want to be in the future. You don't deserve to have that taken away from you because of my family's mistakes. All I'm offering is to send you there. You will have still earned everything on your own. As she finished, Weiss was happy to see that the reluctance in Ruby's eyes had turned to uncertainty. With her piece said, she let Ruby's hand go and sat back, leaning into her girlfriend a little, as the redhead fell silent in thought. While the girl thought over her reply, Weiss looked up and yawned to make sure she hadn't overstepped any boundaries, and was happy to receive a soft smile in return as the large arm wrapped back around her. Finally, though, after a few minutes, Ruby also looked up from the table and directly into her sister's eyes. Seemingly knowing what she was asking without a word being uttered, Yang gave a small shrug of her shoulders. This is your decision, Rubes, she said apologetically. It's your future, so I can't decide that for you. Ruby let out a disappointed sigh, and Weiss felt Yang shuffle uncomfortably beside her. She knew not being Ruby's guiding hand for the first time was a difficult thing for Yang to do. Can? Ruby paused and shook her head. Can I think about it? Of course. Weiss smiled at her. You don't have to make a decision today. My offer will remain open for as long as you need. Yet again, just as she had all day, the girl fell back into her thoughtful silence. It was still a little unnerving to see the usually happy and excitable girl so muted, but she certainly understood that the girl would have a lot on her mind. So leaving Ruby to her thoughts, Weiss pulled out her scroll to check if Fletch had replied, while they waited for their food, melting back into Yang as she did. Stretching her arms above her head and stifling a yawn, Weiss dropped her jacket onto her bed. Despite lunch having ended hours ago, Ruby had still not given her an answer. In fact, the girl had remained almost completely silent for the entirety of the afternoon they had spent together. She hadn't expected her to, though. Hoped? Sure, but just like everyone presented with a big decision, Ruby was taking her time deciding. After lunch had been finished, though, she had dropped both of them off at Blake's store and spent the next few hours at the office going over details with Dr. Polendina. She was actually rather happy with how it was progressing. Since Dr. Polendina was already an expert in the field of biology and technology, a solid plan of what they should be aiming to test first was already in place. Thankfully, since she had no idea what most of the technical aspects meant, she trusted Abigail and Polendina knew what they were doing. During those 4 hours at the office, though, she had been constantly checking her scroll for an email. In truth, despite Yang encouraging her to be patient, she was getting a little worried. In her experience while talking to him, Allburn had never been an indecisive man. In fact, he had been a rather resolute one. Though, she supposed that was probably the issue. Changing minds wasn't easy, especially when they belonged to people like Allburn, so all she could do was hope that her attempts to show him she wasn't like Jacques had succeeded. "Busy day, daughter?" Weiss was forced to suppress the groan that rose to her throat. After a full week, she supposed it was finally time for him to make his move. "I would have thought that no longer sneaking around would have helped you conserve some energy." She let out a silent breath and stood up to face him. Framed in the doorway in his usual white suit, the man stood with his arms behind his back and a bored look on his face. "Though, I do suppose that prancing around in front of the cameras without shame for a week must be rather tiring." "I have not been prancing around," Weiss countered. "I have been living my life." "MMM," he said dully, pulling a magazine from behind his back and thumbing through it. On the cover, she saw a picture of her and Yang kissing against the woman's bike. "And what must the people think of you?" "I couldn't care less what the people think of me," she scowled. She didn't expect him to go easy on her, so there was no need to try and placate the man. "Besides, you have already done far more than I to tarnish our name." The bored look was instantly replaced with a bitter one. "Watch your tone, girl," he snapped. Despite openly defying him, the sharp tone of his voice still caused a shiver to rush through her. After all, she knew all too well how quickly those verbal lashings could turn into physical ones. Nevertheless, she pushed it down. No longer would she let him control her. "Did you come to my room just to be snide?" she asked impatiently. "Or did you want something?" "Actually, I did," he said, walking inside and dropping the magazine onto the table, as if it was something that had personally insulted him. "Your behavior as of late has become rather concerning, and I can't help but notice that the quality of your work in both college and the company has been extremely disappointing." Weiss knew for a fact that was a lie since her grades were higher than ever. "Clearly, I have not been giving you as much attention as I should have," he said sternly. "So I have decided to take you out of accounting. Starting tomorrow, you will be working as my personal assistant." Weiss' eyes widened at that news. Though she had definitely not been enjoying her time in the accounting department, the idea of being her father's assistant was much, much worse. The idea of having to spend the entire workday under her, the man's command, was certainly that sent another shiver through her. "What?" Yes. I also think that allowing you to continue to lead such a daunting project while so clearly distracted would be a very poor decision on my part, so I shall be giving your nerve chip to Watts instead." While the other punishment had caught her off guard, that she had been prepared for. "If you do that, you lose General Ironwood's backing." The man froze and looked at her, his cold eyes falling into a confused scowl. "What do you mean?" "Oh, didn't I tell you?" Weiss smiled, straightening up. "Ironwood's deal is only valid should I remain in charge. That was one of his conditions." At that news, the man's brow furrowed even more, and his eyes turned cold as ice. It was clear he had not expected that revelation, and wanted to press that advantage. She picked up the magazine and held it up for him to see. "Do you really think I didn't expect you to attempt to turn me against Yang once you found out?" she asked, unable to keep the annoying from her voice. "And that I wouldn't prepare for it?" The man turned away from her and walked over to the balcony, clasping his hands behind his back. "Surely your assumption that I would have issues with this woman shows your own doubts about your relationship," he said with a slight, uninterested shrug. "Besides, for all your preparations, you will find that I still hold all the power, daughter." What makes you think I will not simply move the project to Atlas? Or cancel it altogether? You have already sunk money into it, Weiss said confidently. And we all know how much you love money. As for moving it to Atlas, doing so will cost you Dr. Polidina and any chance of it succeeding. Would you really take a loss to spite me? Weiss knew it was a risky bluff. If there was one thing Jacques loved as much as money, it was feeling in control, but she had to play risky if she was going to win a contest of wills. The man turned around, his eyes cold and calculating. I could move you to Atlas, he said plainly. Had it been 4 months ago, that threat might have worried her. Back then, inheriting the company had been her primary goal, one which she would have done anything to make come true. However, having spent every day since doing nothing but fixing the company's messes and uncovering filthy secret after filthy secret, she was no longer sure the company was where her future lied. It was still a path for her, and one she was interested in, but if following that path meant letting her father rule her life, then would she ever really have a life of her own? I am not your pet, she spat, knowing the answer to that question. Or another thing you own. I am an adult, and you do not have the power to send me anywhere. He stepped forwards, anger in his eyes, though also a little surprise. You would give up the company? Throw away everything I have given you, for this commoner? You don't even know her, Weiss said without hesitation. But no, I wouldn't. I would give it up for me. I refuse to let my life be only what you allow. Weiss locked her eyes onto his, cold blue meeting cold blue. On most days, she hated that she had inherited those eyes, but there were times where she appreciated it. Times such as this. Though she knew this was only the first move, it was one she had to win, and if using his own gaze against him to show how serious she was about her words was what she had to do, then so be it. He hummed quietly, his voice low and dangerous. One day, Weiss, you will see that everything I do is for your benefit. Shaking his head, he broke the eye contact and walked past her towards the door. But, she turned and saw him resting a hand on the frame. You are right, I suppose. I do not know her, which is why I expect her to be here tomorrow for dinner. He paused briefly, clearly for effect. Maybe then I will see what is so special about this one. Without saying another word, the man left, and relief flooded through Weiss. Though it wasn't by much, she would definitely chalk that one up to a win. How long that would last, however, she wasn't sure. Dinner was an uncomfortable experience at the best of times for the family, but with Jacques interrogating Yang, it would surely be far worse. But there was no avoiding it. Though she was still unsure about following that path, the company was still one she wanted to hold on to for as long as she could, and not bringing Yang to dinner would definitely remove it as an option. So, taking a deep breath and slumping down on her bed, she slowly exhaled and threw the magazine in the trash while pulling her scroll from the jacket pocket to tell her girlfriend the unfortunate news.
And that's all for today. Thanks for coming by and hanging out. I hope to see you next time.